3 minutes after 10 is the time, and our role in life as chronicling the hypocrisy and the contradictory nature of so much journalism at the moment continues apace. Do you think the Daily Mail realises how ridiculous it is to have a front page complaining about wokery in universities and suggesting that free speech is somehow under threat, while also having a fit of the vapours about the Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon saying yesterday that she detests the Tories? And the reason I said the Tories in such a portentous tone is because I think it's a little pop music reference there. I think the is relevant. I tweeted a moment about half an hour ago, and I missed off the. I missed off the definite article. And it's a very different tweet, I think, when you say that. If Nicola Sturgeon said, I detest Tories, you think of people. I detest the Tories, you think of a party. I can detest the Tory party, but still be friends with people in it, I think. Does that make sense? I don't know. We'll explore it together. I worry slightly on a conversation like this, and we'll need lots of callers from Scotland to remind us that not only does the political landscape look very different up there, but also the newspapers are very different. Even the newspapers with the same title have completely different front pages and editorial lines. You have to laugh. It's incredible. I don't know whether the tail wags the dog or the dog wags the tail, but you have papers like the Mail and the Sun printing completely different front pages in Scotland compared to the ones that they print in England, often diametrically opposed to each other. So we need to reflect that in the programme as well. Is it reasonable to detest the Tories? I'm going to fall into that sort of rather well-worn trap, I imagine, in the next few minutes. So some of my best friends are Tories, which is actually true. Some of my best friends are Tories. But I also detest an awful lot of what the current iteration of Tories stand for. The demonisation of refugees, I think, and immigrants in general, most obviously. The appalling attempts to dehumanise some of the most desperate human beings on the planet are detestable. I mean, simply detestable. That is a detestable thing that you do. And that makes elements of the people that are doing it detestable as well. But to detest a person is a different proposition, I'd cautiously suggest. The way that the programme of austerity has increased the gap between the haves and the have-nots and consigned some of the most vulnerable people in society to some of the worst living conditions in the civilised world. And now Liz Truss, apparently, only under pressure, likely to step back from making their lives even worse. There's lots to detest, isn't there? I thought there was lots to detest. Liz Truss suggested not that long ago that Nicola Sturgeon was best ignored. So why aren't Liz Truss's supporters following her advice this morning? Why are they all either pretending or genuinely clutching their pearls about Sturgeon saying that she detests the Tories? So much hypocrisy. It's ridiculous. And we have to be careful, although we'll probably fail. We have to be careful not to become part of the hypocrisy ourselves. Because if ever a subject was almost the definition of footballification, it would be this subject. How on earth do we guard against that? How do we step back from that fairly simple proposition that your answer to the question I'm about to ask will depend entirely upon what you think about Nicola Sturgeon, what you think about the SNP, and what you think about the Tories? It will have absolutely nothing to do with an objective overview of the shifting sands of rhetoric that I am keen to discuss today. If your loyalty to either any of those flags, your loyalty or disloyalty to the Nicola Sturgeon standard, the Scottish flag, the Scottish national flag, or indeed the British Tory party, is going to completely determine your answer to this question. I don't know if there's much point you ringing. Yeah, I shouldn't really do that at 7 minutes after 10, should I, on a Monday morning? Start the business of telling you who shouldn't ring in to my first topic of the week. It's a little presumptuous, possibly even a tad conceited. But if I would be able to know exactly what your opinion is by simply asking you what you think of Nicola Sturgeon, rather than asking you what you think of Nicola Sturgeon's words this weekend, I don't know how helpful that would be. Do you? Let's find out. The number you need is 0345 6060 I've got two versions. I actually saw this. I was flicking around. I was looking for, trying to get Match of the Day off the iPlayer. And I actually stumbled across the Laura Kuenssberg show on BBC One. And I heard this live. And I thought to myself at the time, three things, actually. The first thing I thought was, that's quite a big deal. The second thing I thought was, your antennae on what's a big deal and not a big deal has not been terribly reliable over the years, mate. I wouldn't necessarily stick your neck out on this one. And the third thing I thought was, I wonder whether this will kick off with people pretending to be offended and or outraged by what she has said. But there were my three thoughts. I now have four. I have a fourth thought, which is, maybe some people aren't pretending. Maybe some people are genuinely outraged by this. Maybe some people are genuinely disgusted, in which case they'd have to explain why they weren't disgusted when Liz Truss directly and personally insulted Nicola Sturgeon. And indeed, in many ways, all the people of Scotland, when she described their First Minister as being someone who was best ignored. It was in the same breath almost, wasn't it, that she said the jury was still out on whether Emmanuel Macron was a friend or a foe. We are working up to a topic during Liz Truss's premiership, and we better hurry up, I suppose, because I'm not quite sure how long it's going to last. But we are working up to a topic about who she actually likes. Reported at the weekend that even Kwasi Kwarteng was putting her chances of survival at 40-60. A great piece in the Sunday Times, that was. One of those real sort of deep dives into the weeds of the Conservative Party conference. So even Kwasi Kwarteng, I suspect her closest ally by some distance, has got her odds on to be out of a job sooner rather than later. I even had a look at the bookies. I never do that. My history of betting on politics it's quite weird, actually. My predictions about politics keep coming true, whether it's Boris Johnson, Brexit, Jeremy Corbyn, or whatever it is that we predict next. But I never have predictions framed in such a way that allows me to put money on them. But I think you get 7-1 on Liz Truss being gone by Christmas, which looks quite tempting until you remember two things. One, Christmas is actually pretty soon. That doesn't come as a major shock to anybody, but in terms of political term time, Christmas is just around the corner. And the second reason why that is probably not a bet worth placing is that the May local elections are probably going to be the acid test of whether or not Liz Truss ranks with the shortest serving prime ministers in history. We will have to wait and see. But anyway, I digress slightly. Would you like to hear what Nicola Sturgeon said on the telly yesterday? Would you? Should we do the long version first? Let's do the long version first.
Is Liz Truss a friend or a foe?
We're political opponents, but I've always tried to work with her predecessors, and I will try to work with her. So I would like to be a friend on the basis of the areas where we can work together constructively.
And what about Keir Starmer, friend or foe?
I work very well with Keir Starmer over Brexit. I'm really disappointed that Keir Starmer has thrown in the towel on the European Union and no longer wants to take the UK or Scotland back into the European Union.
Who would you rather have as Prime Minister?
Well, that's not a difficult question. I mean, if the question to me is, would I prefer a Labour government over a Tory government? I detest the Tories and everything they stand for, so it's not difficult to answer that question.
So yes, you want to see Keir Starmer in
what
number
I'd say,
10?
Two things. Firstly, being better than the Tories is not a high bar to cross right now. I think we need to see more of a radical alternative from Labour rather than just a pale imitation. And if you're asking me, do I think either a Westminster Tory government or a Westminster Labour government is good enough for Scotland, then my answer to that question is no.
And two things I noticed from that. I'm doing a lot of counting today. I don't know whether you've noticed. Three thoughts I had watching the telly. Two reasons why you shouldn't place a bet. Two things struck me there, listening back for the second time, having seen it live yesterday. The interview didn't really pick up on it. Didn't strike her. The interview is Scottish, of course, but didn't seem to strike her as being noteworthy. Whether that is a misstep or actually quite a creditable reflection of how important it really is, we will now discuss. But there was no sort of jump in and go, you what? You detest? And also, I mean, if you listen to it, it's in its entirety, and you're not looking at it through the lens of Daily Mail coverage or Daily Telegraph coverage. She's literally saying, I will work with Liz Truss as a friend. I would rather be friends with these people than foes. And then she says, I detest the Tories. I don't think I'm dancing on a pinhead here. But if she had said, I detest Tories, I would be giving her a coating this morning. I would be talking about how unacceptable that is, how unhelpful, and also, and you might not like this, depending on your politics, how it really plays into the hands of the most dishonest of politicians and pundits, the right-wingers who pretend to be offended and outraged by things that they would routinely do themselves. You remember Andrea Jenkins, is that her name, actually giving the finger. The universal sign of telling you what to do with you, where to go, actually giving the finger to voters outside Downing Street, the seat of government, a minister actually flicking the bird It's not. Is it the bird or is that the bird? Is that the bird? I don't know. Anyway, giving the single finger salute to protesters outside Downing Street. There's something truly grim about that. There's nothing, to my mind, particularly grim about the leader of the SNP, the First Minister of Scotland, stating that she detests the Tories in the context of that whole sentence. And if you were minded to ring in and go, oh, it's outrageous, it's disgusting, she should be cancelled immediately, I would urge you to think about what she said immediately prior to that. She simply said that she would be keen to work. Liz Truss hasn't contacted her. Did you know that? She hasn't been in touch with Mark Drakeford or Nicola Sturgeon, unless since yesterday she's been on the blower. I mean, how could she, really, without eating quite a slice of humble pie? She was so unnecessarily and personally rude about Nicola Sturgeon. And I think about Mark Drakeford. Didn't she say something horrible about Mark Drakeford as well? It's all so unnecessary. But it is actually grounds for detesting the approach, the mindset, the attitude, but not the person. And if you think I am dancing on a pinhead, then the number remains the same. 03456060973 is the number that you need. What is the question? The question is, well, it's twofold. There's the big question, and then there's the slight, what might be a pedantic question, but I don't think actually is. Did Nicola Sturgeon do anything wrong there? She's doubled down on it. She's not going to be retreating from it. And of course, contained within that question is all of these people queuing up to clutch their pearls. Are they for real? Are you for real? Do you really feel outraged by this? Or is your answer to that question determined entirely by your preconceived attitude towards Nicola Sturgeon or Scottish nationalism in general? 03456060973. And the second question, that definite article is really important, isn't it? There is a world of difference between saying I hate Tories and saying I hate the Tories. At least it seems so to me. Let's find out what you think after this. 18 minutes after 10 is the time. Let's play the short version and then get stuck into what we think about it.
Is Liz Truss a friend or a foe?
We're political opponents, but I've always tried to work with her predecessors and I will try to work with her. So I would like to be a friend on the basis of the areas where we can work together constructively.
And what about Keir Starmer, friend or foe?
I work very well with Keir Starmer over Brexit. I'm really disappointed that Keir Starmer has thrown in the towel on the European Union and no longer wants to take the UK or Scotland back into the European Union.
Who would you rather have as Prime Minister?
Well, that's not a difficult question. I mean, if the question to me is, would I prefer a Labour government over a Tory government? I detest the Tories and everything they stand for, so it's not difficult to answer that question.
And there it is. 18 after 10 is the time. Alex is in Edinburgh. Alex, what do you reckon?
Good morning. Well, I'm not a fan of Nicola Sturgeon. I don't like her politics, and I generally don't like the way she goes about her politics. But in this case, I think it's Tories making a mountain out of a molehill. When I heard her speak, I thought she was specifically referring to the governments we've had since 2010 and Tory MPs and their policies. At no point did I think it was referring to people who vote Conservative or even members of the Conservative Party. And to be honest, the language is completely justified, not only when you look at the record of the last 12 years, but the conduct of Johnson's government and Truss's government.
And to write it up without reference to the beginning of that quote is a fairly deliberate or conclusive admission that you are treating your readers like idiots.
Yeah, absolutely.
The front of the quote where she literally talks about her willingness or otherwise to work with Liz Truss and Keir Starmer and the words friend or foe appear. But if you remove that from it, and just as the Times does today, stick in the quote, is the question to me, would I prefer a Labour government over a Tory government? I detest the Tories and everything they stand for. To run that article, as the Scottish political editor has written, although it may have been subbed latterly at the Times, without reference to what she said previously, is pretty deliberate propaganda.
Absolutely. And the thing is, there are lots of things that Nicola Sturgeon can be criticised for, but to go after this one, it's just incredibly petty and misleading, really.
Dangerous language, one critic has said.
I don't think it's dangerous language. I think the danger is Liz Truss's government and what happened to our democracy and institutions under Boris Johnson. That's actually dangerous.
And indeed it was Nadeem Zahawi who deployed that phrase first on the same programme. I think that language is really dangerous, and he's happy to serve in Boris Johnson's cabinet while truly dangerous things were being done, not only to the country but also, of course, to the unwritten constitution and the reverence we have for regulations, standards and traditions even. Alex, thank you. I'm keen to be contradicted, or keen for someone to contradict Alex. I should make that point. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. Backlash after Sturgeon insists she detests Tories. That's a deeply misleading article, or a deeply misleading headline above an article that makes no mention of the bit she said at the beginning of the question, or the beginning of the answer, about her willingness and indeed her enthusiasm for working with Liz Truss, who has thus far as we know, made no contact whatsoever with the Scottish First Minister. And then Nadhim Zahawi pipes up with I think that language is really dangerous. I do, especially on Mondays when my energy levels are high, I do have a tendency to possibly overcomplicate issues like this. But I would quite like to know whether you think Nadhim Zahawi is telling the truth, or whether he just saw an opportunity for a little bit of very cynical politicking. There's no way the language is really dangerous as far as I can tell, and yet here he is, claiming that it is. I presume he has still said nothing about that woman, that Conservative woman MP, flicking the bird at actual voters outside the actual Downing Street. But hey-ho, horses for courses, or indeed horses for heated stables in Nadhim Zahawi's case. Zoe's in Fife. Zoe, what do you reckon?
Hello, James.
Hello,
Good
Zoe.
morning to you.
Good morning to you.
I think it's perfectly valid. I mean, remember, she just said the Tories, not Tories. She didn't make it personal, unlike so many people want to do towards her, including Liz Truss.
Yes.
And you have to remember the environment she would have grown up in. Nicola Sturgeon, I was very aware of, as a kid, of the poll tax being visited on us. And, I think that Brexit and the sort of buffoon of Boris Johnson and everything else fooled a lot of people into forgetting why so many detested the Tories. And now, handily for a lot of people, Liz Truss has reminded everyone.
Well, again, it's when we have to recognise the differences between Scotland and other parts of the United Kingdom. I mean, in terms of voting, the Conservative Party is almost an afterthought in Scottish politics, and under latest polling, it is an afterthought. But it hasn't
always been.
No, clearly.
I grew up in Dumfriesshire, and actually, when my father had a serious accident and needed care, nobody would help us except our local Tory MP. They are all people, but as a body, they, as far as the Scots have certainly mostly been able to see it, they stand for self-interest and furthering their own, political and career aims.
I mean, to be fair, we should include some of their other achievements, like dehumanising refugees, making the poor poorer, closing libraries, filleting the NHS,
exactly.
Reducing police numbers while claiming that they're somehow not responsible for increases in crime. They've done a lot more than you give them. A lot more than you give them credit for. So, and of course, Brexit.
My brother is now a Finnish citizen because his hand was forced, and he and his wife had to take Finnish citizenship because they need to be near his children.
I heard from some Polish friends yesterday who are in the process of moving back to Poland because the standard of living is going to be higher, and they're high earning. I mean, he's a big shot computer programmer who can work wherever he wants in the world, but they're going back to Poland, which was not the plan when they moved here 10 years ago. Also,
to put it this way, I'm not a big fan of the SNP either. But the reason that many people in Scotland want independence is so that we can have proper politics and get rid of the SNP, because they've been a disaster in so many ways. We want to sort our country out.
Well, there it is. I mean, this is nuance that I think may be a surprise to many Westminster watchers who don't pay enough attention to events outside the Westminster bubble. A real deep problem with the SNP, but you're not going to be joining in any bandwagoned attempt to attack the leader of that party for comments that are, I think, at the very least fair and at the very most bang on the blooming money. 25 minutes after 10 is the time. 0345 6060973. I mean, let's be fair, it's not front page news here, but it is written up in the right-wing newspapers in a way that is disingenuous, if not dishonest. The Telegraph's headline, again, misses out the definite article. Sturgeon has no regrets over detesting Tories. Nicola Sturgeon has said she does not regret stating that she, quotes, detests, end quotes, Tories. Not that she, quotes, detests the, end quotes, Tories. after she was accused of using really dangerous inflammatory language and insulting more than 600,000 Scottish Conservative voters. Here's an interesting thing. Thank you, Zoe. I'll be with you shortly, Brian, in Loch Lomond. Here's a really interesting thing that we can never really dig into. You'd need to be doing anonymous focus groups. You'd have to have people answering questions that they would not be held to account for. They'd be able to tell you the unvarnished truth away from the lens of a camera or the muff of a microphone. That's the technical term, by the way. Don't stop sniggering at the back. Come on, honestly, it's not a carry-on film. But does anybody really think they're dangerous? All of the people that might be queuing up on social media or in Nadeem Zahawi's case on television to describe these words as really dangerous, if you had a truth serum and you asked them, are you telling the truth? I think they'd all say no. I think they're all lying. None of them think it's actually really dangerous. They've just seen a fairly easy opportunity for a bit of lazy, cynical political point scoring. And of course, Nicola Sturgeon won't care because, and this is what Zoe just reminded me of, she doesn't speak to English voters. She's interested only in Scottish voters. So there's no PR disaster for Nicola Sturgeon when she says she hates the Tories, because in Scotland it's practically a national pastime at the moment. Brian's in Loch Lomond. Brian, what would you like to say?
I completely agree with Nicola. I've never voted Tory in my life. Don't really know anybody that has. And I detest the cruel policies that they enact upon every corner of this country. And I think it's a mountain out of a molehill. I live in a country where I have to ask permission from another country to cast a vote on how I would like the future of my country to be determined. I live in a country where media is constantly stacked against the SNP. All I ever hear
what's the Scottish? What's the Scottish media like? Forgive me for not having much of an answer to that question myself, but when you go in the newsagent and you turn on the BBC Scotland or you watch the dedicated Scottish news, do you detect bias? And I know we live in an era where everybody sees bias everywhere, so I might ask you to prove it or at least provide some evidence.
I do feel that it is predominantly slanted towards a more kind of union-friendly viewer. The National seems to be the only outlet that is pro-independence.
Well, it was explicitly set up to do that, wasn't it? I mean,
absolutely. But there you go. It had to be explicitly set up to do that because there was nowhere else offering that particular viewpoint. Everything else is caged towards the union.
I'd like to have a conversation about this at another time, and I don't know whether it would work. But I didn't follow things as closely as I should have done during the referendum. I can't remember why. I will next time.
James, I'll tell you what, we need more left-wing outlets up here, so the sooner you move up the road, the better.
I might be seeking asylum. I might be seeking asylum if things carrying on like this. I'll be paddling my dinghy.
I'd love to have you home.
Thank you. I'm not defending the BBC, but if it's the British Broadcasting Corporation, doesn't it have to lean towards support for the union, almost in an existential sense? And I know these are questions that often get debated and what would happen in the event of independence, but I kind of can't quite see the BBC not.
Yeah, I thought the BBC's remit was that they weren't to be populist.
No, not populist. No, but they're the British Broadcasting Corporation. So possibly even subconsciously, surely they're going to want to protect the Union of Britain, aren't they? Or not? I don't know.
But that's just one outlet.
Yeah.
You've also got everything else that's stacked against us. It's ridiculous.
I hear you, and I'm on a learning curve, as you know, Brian. I'm trying to be better, and I think I'm succeeding, although it's baby steps. Quite a few people sending messages, thank you, Brian, that play into this position here, texted. My two best friends are Tories. I detest their politics. It is a weird one. I never quite understood as a younger man that thing about never talking about politics or religion at the dinner table. We did little else in my house growing up, but I've got friends now. We can't go near. I get occasional shamefaced comments about Brexit. That's all. But I've got friends who are, Tory royalty almost. Certainly got friends who are proper conservative, old school One Nation conservatives. There's some stuff we just don't talk about. But oddly, when it comes to things like Boris Johnson, we pretty much agree with each other. That's the weird thing. You talk about detesting the Tories. Who are you talking about? Are you talking about Norman Tebbit and Rory Stewart as if they're somehow part of the same grouping, or you're talking about Nadine Dorries and Anna Soubry. That's ridiculous. That's chalk and cheese. You can't be in favour of both or against both. Or maybe you can, I don't know. Anyway, Nicola Sturgeon's comments continue to interest us. More of your thoughts on 0345 606 0973. It's 10:31. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines. What do you detest? We touched on this last week. I think I used the word hate to describe a mindset that I hate, that I detest. They don't quite mean the same thing, actually. And the if you like, the semantic definition of detest comes ever further to Nicola Sturgeon's defence against ludicrous claims from Nadine Zahawi that her language was somehow dangerous. But I detest quite a few things going on in British politics. I detest the lies that were told about Brexit, the way that people are still reduced to pretending that they didn't vote to be richer or to have a better NHS. You should find that article from 2016 that Gove Johnson and Gisela Stewart all wrote together for Rupert Murdoch's Sun newspaper, and then tell me whether they were telling you the truth. I despise the divisions that remain in our country. I despise the continuing demonisation of refugees in particular, immigrants in general, the sort of Faragification, if you like, of public discourse in this country, which has allowed the doors to be open to successive Home Secretaries whose attitudes to these issues are truly repellent. There's lots of stuff to detest. And you could extrapolate. I detest the way that Boris Johnson rode roughshod over everything from his own ethics advisor, his own advisor on ministerial standards, right through to the laws that he enacted himself on coronavirus. So, I detest the Tories. I don't know if I'd actually say it. I've always fought a little bit shy of that Aneurin Bevan comment about them being lower than vermin. But Nicola Sturgeon's comments so far receiving absolutely no support at all, which is probably because if you did want to support them, we'd both know you were lying. Theo Ushwood is here. 10:36 is the time. Theo, what's occurring?
We have an update from Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, to say that he is going to bring forward the publication of forecasts by the Office for Budget Responsibility. Remember, these were the forecasts that the government didn't commission. They could have commissioned. The Office for Budget Responsibility said they were ready to publish, ready to do the analysis and to publish them now. They were due to be published alongside the medium-term fiscal plan on the 23rd of November, but will now be published on October the 31st. By my reckoning, that's Monday, October the 31st. And Kwasi Kwarteng saying that it will allow the OBR to detail exactly how the government is going to come up with £43 billion of costings for its tax cuts. Or if it's not going to come up with those £43 billion of costings through tax cuts, through savings in spending, then is it going to resort to borrowing? And what is the reaction of the market going to be?
So what do they know that we don't know?
Who, the OBR?
Yeah.
Well, they would do analysis of growth.
So they would be able to sustainability of what they don't know anything that we don't know. They're just going to crunch the numbers in a way that
they're going to crunch the numbers, but they'll also.
Kwarteng has said we're going to raise money by cutting taxes.
Yes, but Kwarteng has also said that you would end up, and this is the argument from Liz Truss, that you would end up with growth that you wouldn't otherwise have. Economic growth you wouldn't otherwise have. They set the target at 2.5%.
Yes, no, I understand.
And if you have that, then you would get you would gain extra revenue, which could then cover the cost of the tax cuts. But of course, the argument from the markets, you could say, and arguments from other economists.
The markets were spooked by the failure to explain how it was going to work, and the OBR are now going to cast an eye over whether or not it's going to work.
Exactly, and it's been brought forward.
Well, he wanted to keep them out of the room altogether.
Yes.
Just 16 short days ago.
And of course, this also ties into what was being talked about a couple of hours ago by Victoria Prentice, the Work and Pensions Minister, who was saying, well, actually, we won't, this is the government minister saying we won't detail exactly whether to uprate benefits in line with inflation. That was a promise that goes back to April from Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak.
Yes.
They were saying, Victoria Prentice was saying, well, we won't do that until the middle of November, late November, to coincide with the medium-term fiscal statement. But you would have to presume that would also have to be brought forward, because we're talking of, if the government is to uprate in line with inflation, we're talking about spending commitments in terms of well, depends where inflation is, north of 10 billion, 12 billion pounds.
It's very early in administration for me to be feeling this, but I have to double check with you which way they're facing on any number of issues because it's changing so much. So are we now confident? I think I heard Nick Ferrari talking about this morning, that they're not going to cut benefits in real terms. We think they are now going to increase benefits according to inflation as opposed to...
Or very close to
And
inflation.
where's that come from again? Victoria Prentice?
Well, Victoria Prentice would refuse to be committed. She said...
Right, so where has the story come from that they're abandoning that policy?
Well, it's coming from number 10 and number 11.
It is coming.
And you're listening, and you're also listening to people like Nadeem Zahawi, the Cabinet Office Minister, who struck a very different tone yesterday when he said no decision has been made, compared to Liz Truss on Wednesday last,
refusing
where she was speaking to LBC, saying, well, actually, pensions which are going up in line with inflation are very different to benefits because when you're on pensions, they're fixed incomes.
She appeared to be laying the groundwork for a policy that number 10 and number 11 are now letting it be known is probably not going to be enacted.
Yes. That was on Wednesday last.
But now Liz trusted it, and it was this weekend. So there's no official announcement. They haven't actually said we're not doing this thing.
No, but we would assume that we would get it rather than it being late November, as Victoria Prentice was saying. Well, let me just check my watch.
Well, that's going to come earlier, isn't it?
2 hours. That's going to come much earlier as well.
And this then plays into the front pages today about rebellions and backlashes. And it's astonishing, isn't it? PM scrambles to save her premiership as Tories warn of wipeout. Rebels urge to stop plots and show loyalty to Daily Express. Bless the little cotton socks. And Truss turns on the charm. Truss turns on the what?
Charm.
Can she?
Well, there's a tour of the tea room, the Commons parliamentary tea room.
I think Alistair Campbell pointed out this morning that only really... We should do this every day. We should do 10 minutes every day with Theo, going through the political stories in the papers. Is anyone writing this down? We should do this every day, shouldn't we?
We can do.
We could call it Theo time. Theo time. Get a jingle, get a bit of production, get a sting, get a stamp.
There's already a jingle.
For Theo time.
No, not with that voice.
Theo time. Don't you want to do Theo time?
Who's the listener who's amazing with jingles?
We've got several. And they're amazing with T-shirts as well. I've got my Anti-Growth Coalition T-shirt. Do you want to see it? Here's my Anti-Growth Coalition T-shirt.
Well, haven't you got it on?
I'm going to put it on later for a viral clip. Are we on air? I'm doing. Are we actually? I'm doing all. This is all my off-air chat. This is all my top ideas.
It's nearly 11:15, and you don't have your Anti-Growth Coalition AGC T-shirt on.
What do you think? From Balcony Shirts in Uxbridge. It's lovely, isn't it?
Yeah. It's got a little arrow pointing upwards.
That's crossed out, though. We don't like that.
That's growth.
Yeah, we don't like that. Oh, no, we don't like that. What's the other story I was talking about? Of course, all these rebels. So she's going on a charm offensive. Alistair Campbell said earlier that you usually do that several years into an administration when the rot is sort of setting in. Liz Truss is doing it several days into hers.
Boris Johnson went on a similar charm offensive in May, June.
Just before the guillotine fell upon his premiership.
Yeah.
Gosh.
It's fairly dire times, but I think there's a feeling that she has to be, and the Chancellor has to be given a chance with this medium-term fiscal statement to try and cobble together something that will set out her plan for growth and chime with the rhetoric of her conference speech, and at the same time keep MPs who are critical of her premiership on side by ensuring that their requirements, especially around benefits and universal credit, are met, and at the same time meet the confidence or maintain the confidence of the markets by not putting it all on borrowing.
So in week 3, given the state funeral, this is essentially week 3 of the administration. The top 3 stories are the OBR have no place in Kwasi Kwarteng's budgetary pronouncements, and now they do. So that's a U-turn. It's a U-turn. Top tax. A tax cut for top earners was announced and then quickly withdrawn. That's a U-turn. And benefits will not be going up in line with inflation because something about pensioners something, she said last Wednesday, and we now think that's a U-turn as well.
That's can you have
3 U-turns?
Can you have a sort of surreptitious U-turn where you don't announce something, you let something be known, and then when you do the U-turn, because you haven't said it outright on the record, then it's not really a U-turn?
No, it's an abandonment of a previously held position that you hadn't actually confirmed you were holding, but everybody knew you were.
We need a snappier phrase.
What would be a snappier phrase for that? Like a kind of blue turn? No, blue tern. Yeah, blue tern's quite good.
We need a snappier.
Well, come on then. Don't just sit there poo-pooing. A poo tern. It's a blue tern.
So
they've abandoned it. They'd been very careful not to commit to it publicly, but everybody knew they were doing it.
Yeah.
And now they've abandoned
wanted to do it.
And now they've abandoned it. So it's a yoo-hoo tern? No. We'll work on this. We'll work on this. And we need a jingle as well for Theo time.
Anyway, busy.
Theo time.
So ridiculous.
10:47 is the time. Poor old Jackie in Stuttgart. It's been on hold for about 10 minutes. Jackie, I'll be with you shortly, but I've got something else I must attend to first, which is a live cross to Kyiv, where, as you will know, recriminations or revenge attacks for the blowing up of that bridge at the weekend, the bridge between Crimea and Russia, an incredibly symbolic bridge for the Russian regime, for Vladimir Putin in particular. He actually drove a truck over it at the time of its opening, and you'd have seen the astonishing pictures this weekend. But inevitably, perhaps, response has been swift and deadly, with bombs landing once again in the Ukrainian capital for the first time in a long time. Trent Murray is in Kyiv for LBC and currently in a bomb shelter. So apologies in advance for any problems with the line or the technology. Trent, what can you tell us?
Yeah, good morning, James. What a terrifying start to the Monday week here in the Ukrainian capital. So, just for your listeners, I'm currently in a bomb shelter, one of many across the Ukrainian capital. It's a hotel car park. I understand that all of the underground services have also been suspended in Kyiv so that the metro stations can fill up with people. A lot of people going down there seeking shelter. I sort of had to run here with my cameraman. We were outside together for a run when one of those, the first missile hit. We sort of heard the swoosh sound, if you will. Just an extraordinary experience, I have to say, followed by the explosion, and pretty clear something had happened. And then 10 seconds later, the same sort of set of sounds. And you just sort of run in that situation. As you do, you get an idea of where the nearest bomb shelter is and you go for it. And that's what we did alongside a lot of other people. And have basically just spent the past few hours down here now. Now, in terms of information from outside, up there, if you will, I really only know as much as probably what you know and the other news agencies. But it certainly seems that the Ukrainian capital has copped a real hit today. It hasn't really been hit in this way since the beginning of the war. And, air raid sirens are pretty common here. I've certainly heard many of them. And it's got to the point that many people here just don't pay attention to them anymore. They think that they are probably just a false alarm because they have been in the past. But clearly today, it wasn't a false alarm. A playground was hit, an opera theatre was hit, an office building was hit, not military infrastructure, that's for sure. And so right now the people of Kyiv have woken up to the fact this war has hit home to them.
I don't want to invite speculation unduly, Trent, because it's obviously much more important than that. But the sense I've got, speaking to journalists on the ground since it started, is that the resolve of Ukrainian people is pretty much unshakable. I wonder whether you agree with that, or whether you think perhaps the return of bombs to Kyiv itself may almost have a psychological impact on Ukrainians, on residents of Kyiv.
They're pretty brave people. They're pretty brave people. There wasn't panic, I have to say. Probably me being an outsider was probably running a lot faster than them. They were calm. At the hotel here, the staff, God bless them, are still working and bringing out coffee and tea and food to make sure people here are okay. I did see one video of one of the main underground stations full of people. They were singing their national anthem, saying they weren't going to be shaken or scared. And it seems no matter what Vladimir Putin throws at these people, they just resolutely go about their business, work to defend their territory, and obviously calling for other countries to help as much as they can. The big call right now is more of those air defense systems, because we know it's not just Kyiv today. A number of other cities have been hit. It's a big territory that they need to protect, those population centres. And, I think certainly the focus of the day will be on countries like Germany and France and others, and asking, can they do more, particularly with air defence?
I just see, as you speak, actually, the G7 are meeting tomorrow specifically to discuss the ongoing situation in Ukraine. Trent Murray, stay safe, mate, won't you? And thank
Thanks,
you.
James.
No, thank you. We'll talk again. That's the reminder there that the capital city of Ukraine, which Putin thought he would take in 2 or 3 days, has been largely spared bombardment and attack by Russian forces for months now, but very much back in the firing line. If you want to have a look at that footage that Trent referred to, it's very powerful. Kira Rudik, the Ukrainian politician who's appeared on LBC and indeed on this programme quite a few times now, the leader of the party Golos, has tweeted it, and you can see that tweet either by following her, Kira in Congress, or just have a look at my account where it's a sort of about 10 tweets down my feed. 10:52 is the time. Back to Nicola Sturgeon and the, I think, growing, fairly now hardened opinion of mine that nobody thinks her words are dangerous, and that Nadeem Zahawi was talking out of his fundament when he said that they were, just spotting a cynical, lazy opportunity to engage in some ad hominem or ad feminem abuse that bears no resemblance whatsoever to the reality of her words. Well, that's what I think. What does Jackie in Stuttgart think?
Morning, James.
Hello, Jackie. Sorry to keep you.
That's okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm very much the same age as Nicola Sturgeon, years too younger. Oh, yeah. And what she said is true, I think, of pretty much everybody in Scotland and Scots outside of Scotland of that age. And,
it can't be everybody.
It
can't be every. I mean, you've got Scottish MPs, you've got Scottish councillors who are conservative.
Pretty much, they are vanishingly rare, James.
Yes, but you said everybody. Don't make me go all pedantic on you. Oh, right, pretty much everybody.
No, because we grew up with the Thatcher government, as did Liz Truss. And we grew up with free school milk being taken away. We grew up with miners' strike. We grew up with the poll tax. It was awful, and the Tories were detested in Scotland.
So did we. So did everyone in England. It is odd, isn't it, that those points seem to you to be so powerful in explaining the unpopularity of the Conservatives, and yet
there's nothing. When you look at
I'm not arguing with you. I'm just reflecting on how it's happened because we've had 12 years of Tory rule in this country. Some of it, we had that astonishing election result just 3 years ago, and yet all of the things you've just cited as historical reasons for Tory unpopularity in Scotland, they all happened here as well. Yeah, arguably even more.
But I think when you that was the old Tories. When you look at the new ones, that what they've done to Britain over the last 6 years in particular, but since 2010, with austerity, with Brexit, with Johnson
that wasn't the Tories. That wasn't the Tories. They were just in power. That was the woke mob, Gary Lineker, and kneeling footballers. They're the ones that have done. They're the ones that have done all the damage to the country. Jackie, for heaven's sake, keep up.
Okay, but they weren't the ones who made it sort of de rigueur to lie in Parliament, to lie.
That was Ramona's. That was Ramona's. That was all their fault. We had to lie to get Brexit done because all those Ramonas were all standing in our way with their facts and their evidence and their truth.
I know it's dreadful. It's awful.
It is dreadful.
But yeah. So I would and I haven't always seen eye to eye with Nicola Sturgeon's politics. I was never pro-independence in 2014. I am now. I think she's one MP that's behaved consistently with integrity and tries
she's
to
not
be
perfect. None of them are perfect.
She's not perfect. No. None of them are. But I think of all of the party leaders back in, I'm trying to think when it was, when she was in a debate with Clegg and I think Cameron.
2015.
And she stood out, and an awful lot of English viewers of that debate were saying, can't we have one like that?
Yeah, equally, we actually, I don't need to challenge that. I think you're right. An awful lot of English people probably did think can't we have one like that? Although we had Gordon Brown at the time, who, I think history is probably going to judge as one of the most unfairly maligned politicians of the 21st century. Thank you, Jackie. Suchi's in Wimbledon. Last word on this. Suchi, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So a couple of things from my side. One is this news that I've read about Michael Gove being insulted by the cabinet insiders, and they've called him having darkness within him simply because he disagrees with Liz Truss's economics.
I know. Where did you read that? Actually, this should have been in Theo Time.
Yeah, exactly.
Where did you read it?
I don't know, I've got Apple News, so it was
fair enough.
Time. So it struck me as something really rich.
Yes.
Nadeem Zahawi should have been actually pointing fingers at his
That's
own
dangerous
cabinet
language.
colleagues.
That's dangerous language directed at poor little
Exactly.
Mickey Gove. Poor little Mickey Gove.
There you go. And there's another point I wanted to make, which is about, how the Tories have been mocking almost half the population of this country. So I'm one of those proud Remoaners, but I resent being called someone who moans about things as if you're a whiner.
They'll be telling you to stop talking about it soon. I mark my words. Give it another, I don't know, another couple of months, and they'll be saying, "Oh, you've got to stop talking about people who didn't shut up about being in the European Union for the best part of 40 years." Who had absolutely no basis for their antipathy are going to start telling those of us who just insist on pointing out the reality of what they've inflicted on the entire country to wind our neck in and be quiet. I look
forward to that day.
I haven't been wrong yet.
Save a good champagne to toast to that occasion happening. The third thing I very quickly wanted to say is Liz Truss's speech about the anti-growth coalition. Which was just clubbing, all sorts of disparate elements within the society.
It was everyone.
And specifically about, people in North London going in taxis to the BBC studios. So
yes.
I think the Daily Mail should be actually listening to what the Tories are saying before they point fingers at others.
Yeah,
so that was my...
That's a beautifully considered contribution, Suchi. I'm very grateful to you. And of course, that mention of the Daily Mail at the end there, they've got all sorts of problems on the horizon after 6 extremely prominent public figures joined forces to take legal action against them. We should probably do a little bit on that at some point, but more to concern us at the minute with the ebb and flow of modern politics. Another U-turn has been announced since we came on air. This is what Theo Time will do roundups of when we actually get this. I'll probably forget all about it, but Theo's a bit more professional than I am. He'll remind me. So there was a plan to appoint someone to the Treasury as a senior advisor who I think was seen as sort of anti-woke, if you like, or very much a Liz Truss loyalist. She was coming from the Ministry of Justice to become permanent secretary at the Treasury. Sebastian Payne at the Financial Times, very good journalist, Whitehall editor over there, reports this morning that she's now U-turned on that plan and is expected to appoint someone with more Treasury experience. That announcement is due today, prompting Sebastian to suggest that Treasury orthodoxy is well and truly back. That's a sort of reference to the idea that Kwarteng and Truss seem to believe that they had got a better idea of how to run things than anybody else ever. It's 3 minutes after 11 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A story I really had to read twice to believe. Men under 30 are less accepting of women's rights than their older counterparts. It's almost going as far as to say that they are more misogynistic, which in, all the talk of woke and gammon and all those other pithy little descriptors seems very hard to swallow. So we'll probably have a look at that in the final hour if it's something you're particularly interested in. Be aware. So I am fascinated by change, as you know, by transformation, by things that I always think of the smoking ban as a really good example. I mentioned this last week, I think. Things that you just presume are part of the national furniture, that then suddenly aren't. Do you know what I mean? The resistance to change is easy to ridicule and typify. People are reactionary, or they're stuck in the mud, or they're set in their ways. Some things shouldn't be changed. Some things work fine, that old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But there is a mindset, and I suspect that we all wonder whether we're going to fall into it as we get older. I chalked up a half century earlier this year, and it does make, am I going to start getting a bit stuck in the mud? Am I going to start resisting change, resisting transformation? I don't know. But I hope not, because I am fascinated by change, and whether it's for good, for ill, or for neither, it's something that I think we make our most compelling conversations about during our time together every day when we're talking about things that change. Indeed, I wrote a whole book about mind changing, about changing your mind and examining some of my own views and opinions and where they had come from, the ones that I, in retrospect, find a bit embarrassing or even shameful. Where does it come from? So this new notion of people leaving work for reasons, or a new population of people leaving work in circumstances and for reasons that have never applied before, it genuinely fascinates me. It continues to fascinate me, and it becomes ever more important politically because if Suella Braverman's pretty grim attempt to reduce immigration succeeds, then the question of how on earth, I was going to put my anti-growth coalition T-shirt on during the news. I'll do it in the next junction. The question of where is the workforce going? Can you have growth with a shrinking workforce? Do you think? That's not the question this hour, by the way. Don't panic. Can you have growth? Should we do that? Would the grown-ups do that? Do you think can you have growth with a shrinking workforce? Where are they going to come from? Where are all these workers going to come from? Apparently she's unhappy with the Indian trade deal that Liz Truss signed because that would involve a lot more visas being released potentially to Indian workers coming here. She wants to reduce net migration down to tens of thousands at a time when the actual birth rate is becoming problematic in this country. I mentioned earlier, and listen, the plural of anecdote is not data, but some dear friends of ours who have been here for 10 years now, but both their children born here, both got citizenship, but going back to Poland completely unexpectedly, simply because of the way things are shaking down in this country and the standard of living and the sort of overall atmosphere and environment. And tempting people to come here is going to be a challenge. I mean, certainly from, if you like, comparable European countries, economically comparable European countries. Not for the first time. I wonder what all those Brexiters who said they were voting to reduce the number of brown faces in Sainsbury's are making of current movements and current trends, because Liz Truss recognises that we need more immigration. Bizarrely, perhaps, given the nature of political conversation over the last few years, we need more people to come here to work. I think that is probably one of the few recognitions of actual gravity that her and Kwarteng have applied to their economic plans. You can't have growth unless you've got more people earning money than you have. Or I suppose you could have fewer people earning much more money. But where's that money going to come from? So the plan to tempt older workers back into the workplace becomes fascinating. It becomes urgent, in fact. It becomes a really big deal, which leaves us with two questions or two lines of inquiry, if you prefer. The first, and this is what I find fascinating, people who are surprised by their own decisions, people who never, perhaps at 50, thought that they'd be hanging up their headphones. All right, probably not many of you work in radio, but at the age of 50, you never thought you'd be hanging up your headphones at the age of 60. I genuinely find it fascinating. The processes, particularly during lockdown, this happened to a pal of mine, particularly during lockdown when people reassessed their priorities. People had a look at their own future and their own present and decided that they wanted the future to be different from the present in a way that they'd never really contemplated the possibility of before. That's one constituency of people who I don't think can be tempted back to the workplace because they've made a very conscious decision to leave it. They haven't sort of fallen through the cracks in the work-life balance. They've had a look at their work-life balance, they've assessed their financial situation, and they're off. So, what about the other constituency of people? There is a record number of people who have quit their jobs in recent years. A fifth of workers say they plan to resign this year. That makes no sense statistically. That is an emotional, psychological decision. A fifth of workers say they plan to resign this year. This is in the Telegraph. I find that a staggering number, but it's come from research. Record numbers have quit already. A fifth saying they plan to resign this year. So that's going to be a cohort from about 55 to 70, isn't it? When I say a fifth, there's no way that can be annual because you've got people aged between 18 and 60 odd in the workplace. So for 20% of them to go at the end of this year, it's a staggering number. 200,000 older workers aged 50 to 69, there you go, I was nearly right, have left due to ill health. That's since the start of the pandemic. But by early 2020, 110,000 had already left the workforce. So what they've discovered is that a lot of the health-related reasons for leaving the workforce are not actually directly linked to the pandemic. They were on the way out before the pandemic happened, which makes it even more interesting because it means that the reasons for doing it become even more complicated and nuanced. There's several different plates to spin here, isn't there? I should probably explain that. You've got the NHS waiting lists causing some of this, people who can't work until they're not in pain anymore or can't work until they're not ill anymore, and the waiting lists are now so long that they are postponing any return to the workplace indefinitely. But then you've got the people who are planning to quit for non-health reasons who, I don't want to be rude, but in a way they're more interesting because there's an ineluctable logic to not working because you can't work, as opposed to not working because you don't want to work or you don't need to work. And then you've got the third distinction there between want and need. So I'd start that question. If you won the lottery, would you carry on working? If you worked out that with your pensions and your savings and your mortgage and a house move, if you worked out that you could enjoy a relatively pleasant standard of living without actually having to heft your carcass into work every day, would you give up work? It's a variation on the lottery question, isn't it? And I know a lot of people have done that. That was, in my experience, linked to the pandemic. So you've got 3.5 million 50 to 69-year-olds who were not working by the end of the summer this year. Just under half of them were reporting ill health as their main reason for economic activity. And I just want to know the other reasons as well. I mean, we should talk about that. You always remember the phone-in hosts. The sign of the laziest phone-in host in history is the one who says, is there anybody old out there feeling poorly? Because you are guaranteed a switchboard that explodes before the naked eye, but you're unlikely, with respect, and this is true of my own ailments as well, you're unlikely to get many very interesting conversations kicking off as a consequence of asking that question. So I am minded that we kind of want to avoid that. But there are two questions here. Why have you done it? And I'm only really interested in talking to you if you're surprised to find yourself in that situation. If this has been your plan since you left school, it's less interesting to me. I hope that doesn't sound rude. You are surprised to find yourself contemplating early retirement in your mid-50s or your late 50s. 0345 6060 973. And for those of us who are not really in this category, I think the question politically that is most fascinating is this. It's not going to work, is it? There's no way people who've made a decision to leave the workforce are going to be tempted back into... How on earth are you going to tempt people back into the workforce? So we can all have an opinion on that, but if you're living it, if you're part of the constituency that we're discussing, then you can, of course, come at it from a personal angle and say, no, absolutely no chance. I'm knocking it on the head because X, Y, and Z, and there's nothing a government can do to undo any of those. It's the reason I talk about change and transformation at the top of the hour is because it's a really big deal, this. And it's one of those phenomena that you're not going to really look into and look at properly until it's almost too late. We often say on the programme, the subjects that are the most important to discuss are the ones about which you know nothing until you suddenly need to know everything. That's on a personal level, most obviously with care homes or mental health provision or something like that. Magnificent guests, weren't they, on Friday from Parenting Mental Health, that charity. I was so moved by some of the stories we heard and so proud to see just how much money we managed to raise as Global's Make Some Noise Day. But this is the societal or the social equivalent of something about which we know nothing until we need to know everything. The workforce is shrinking. The 50 to 69-year-old, which I am in. Oh, God. Oh, Lordy. I'm getting a flu jab later as well. God, it creeps up on you, doesn't it? So the 50 to 69-year-old age group is knocking it on the head. Partly for health reasons, but largely because it wants to. The government, meanwhile, is desperate to increase the workforce, and if Suella Braverman got her way, it would be forced to do so by only really hiring people who are already here. Do you see why I find this so interesting? You see the planets aligning to create yet more chaos. You've got a Home Secretary who doesn't want people to come here from overseas. You've got a Prime Minister who recognises the need for more workers in various sectors. You've got people listening to this programme in everything from haulage to hospitality who will be screaming already, we cannot get any staff! And then you've got 50 to 69-year-olds who've had enough. Why have they had enough? Why have you had enough? And remember, it's going to be more interesting if you're slightly surprised to have found yourself in this situation. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I'm looking at a sort of reassessment, a recalibration of your entire life that you have undertaken, possibly because lockdown focused the mind, possibly because we've had decades of employers essentially transferring money that would once have gone to employees and investment and research and development, but now instead goes to shareholders and dividend payouts and massive remuneration packages for chief executives and what have you. So you're looking at it. You know, I usually cite that graffiti on the M40 coming into London where it says, if you're coming from the Midlands, it says, it used to say, it hasn't been there for years, it used to say, why do I still do this every day? And the reason I loved that graffiti was because I'd never done a commute like that, but I could kind of get my head, if you listen to Ray Davies and Kinks lyrics, that idea of getting onto the treadmill, getting onto the hamster wheel at the age of 18 or 20 and then staying on it for the rest of your life, it's always had a great impact in a kind of social commentary and indeed in culture and art. But lots of people have metaphorically looked at that graffito, why do I still do this every day, and decided they're not going to anymore. And I want to know why. And then crucially, I also want to know whether anything would tempt you back. Is there anything Liz Truss can do to tempt you back into the workforce? It's 11:16. 19 minutes after 11. It's called The Great Resignation. And I am absolutely fascinated by it. Not least because the more I talk about it, the more I wonder whether I should be rethinking don't get too excited. It's unlikely to happen. My kids need shoes. But I've always thought I'll be sort of not necessarily dragged out of here kicking and screaming when my time comes. But the idea that you don't have to carry on like this. Most of us watched our dads do it, or our mums, or both. You could actually make a choice. You could make a decision. You could change lanes. Relatively late in life in a way that you had never previously contemplated. And I don't know why, I just find it fascinating. And I'm one of those dreadful, insufferable people who absolutely loves his job and would do it in the event of winning the lottery. Andy's in Crewkerne in Somerset. Andy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Yeah, I left my work. I was made redundant in
So that wasn't
February.
your choice, was it, then?
It wasn't, no. And they basically paid me. They literally called me in and said, OK, your consultation period's over, you've been made redundant, and you can go next Friday. Wow. And they basically paid me up for 3 months, and so I had 3 months off, and we did a bit of travelling around Europe, and then I started looking for work. And I had one interview in the insurance industry, and I made a joke about the fact that no one actually goes into insurance because they want to. And the guys basically, when I was told I had got the job, was like, well, you clearly don't want to do insurance.
They have got a point. They've got a point, Andy. I mean, I know the interview environment can be a little bit intimidating, but I don't know that was a very good joke to make in the circumstances.
Well, I don't know, because I've been in the industry for 35 years, so it's what I did. I was good at it, and basically everyone in the insurance
I don't want to hire
knows.
someone who doesn't want to be. If I'm hiring someone for an insurance firm, I don't want to hire someone who doesn't want to be in insurance.
Well, no, but equally, we all know that we didn't want to be there in the first place. We all wanted to be astronauts or train drivers or.
Yeah, I know. Listen, I'm not going to go down this route any further, but it was not a good joke to make, Andy. I mean, regardless of, anyway. So what happened next?
So then I started looking for other work, and then my wife was fed up with her job, and she said, "Why are we doing this?" And we paid the mortgage off fortuitously, and we had friends in Dorset, and we always said, "Why are we going home? Why can't we stay here?" So we then looked at it and thought, well, if we sell in Hertfordshire, buy in Dorset or Somerset, we can take equity out of the house, top up one of her pensions that she could claim, and that's what we did.
How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 58.
And how far ahead have you budgeted with that plan? If not to be morbid.
Basically, we got pensions coming out over there. My first pension comes out next year.
Yeah,
it's not a huge one, but then my wife's another pension comes up a couple of years after that, and then so by the time we can see through till. Next 10, 15 years, really, I think. And so when the state pension kicks in, it'll be a nice bonus.
It's really interesting. And no regret. When did you do it? When did you make the move?
We actually moved a year ago last week. So we arrived in Crewkerne in September 21.
Okay. So any regrets?
None at all. None
You
at
sure
all.
there's no moment where you actually miss work? You just miss the mental engagement. You miss, even if you weren't massively fond of insurance or it wasn't necessarily what you wanted.
Yeah, no, I mean, I miss some of the people I work with and stuff like that. But we're trying to create a new life, so we're trying to do new things and, new hobbies. I mean, we're currently renovating the house. We got workmen in today.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I don't miss work at all. I mean, it's
And this is going to be yours. Is going to be the last generation that can do this, probably, isn't it? With the relationships between mortgages and pensions and all the rest of it.
I agree. We were talking the weekend with friends and about how we're probably the last generation that were end up better off than our parents, and the kids nowadays aren't going to equal what their parents achieved.
You're only 8 years. You're only 8 years older than me. I had no kids. That makes a difference as well because
it does.
I think there's still quite a lot of support to be provided for children well into their 20s now. If you're lucky enough to be able to do it.
Yeah, if we had kids, then we'd still be working. I'm sure.
Possibly. Well, good luck to you. Seriously. And you wake up every morning and the world is your lobster.
Exactly. Yeah.
Take care, Andy. And there it is. Hang on. Final question. If I'd met you 10 years, if I'd seen you when you were 48, and I'd said, Ed, what do you reckon about you retiring at 58? What would you have said?
No chance.
Yeah, there it is. And that's so weird. I wonder what the sort of thought processes are. Feeling a bit rejected, perhaps. And then recalibrating during lockdown, as a lot of people did, or just something completely left field. We're a weird species. I've said this before. It's a bit partridgey, I grant you, but we are a weird species. We think we're really logical, but we're not. You think, I couldn't do that, but you never think, why not? I couldn't do that. Oh no, that's not for me. Why not? Why not? And then people are increasingly answering, looking at this age group here, the 50 to 69-year-olds, who, as Andy I think correctly suggests, are going to be, in the main, the last generation to end up better off than their parents were for a while. I hope that doesn't damage my anti-growth coalition credentials, but they are looking at that question, why do I still do this every day? And they're thinking, actually, why do I still do this? The answer, because I have to, doesn't apply to these people. It might apply to lots of us. It applies to me, for what it's worth, as we are at the moment, and it probably applies to you. It doesn't apply to Andy, and yet 10 years ago that thought wouldn't have popped into his head. Michael's in Barry. Michael, what would you like to say?
Oh, it's great to speak to you, James.
Likewise, Michael.
I go back to pre-COVID when I worked with the NHS.
Yeah.
And we were losing staff then.
Right.
They were going back in anticipation of the B word. They were going back to Poland and to Spain,
yes,
Portugal and places like that. So the situation was deteriorating pre-COVID. So when it actually kicked in, the NHS in my area wasn't prepared. They set up special wards for COVID victims, and even me, as a person that had been trained in orthopedics and gynecology and stuff like that, as a theatre person, was pushed into these special wards dealing with COVID people, working with all the experts on it. And I could see we were struggling then.
Oh, this is dominoes. You're describing dominoes, aren't you, here? So they've
halfway through COVID, I took the resignation steps, thinking, this isn't going to be good. Even for me, for my health mentally and physically, I needed to look at in advance. So I went down the road, I did my bit and resigned, so retired. Yeah. And the thing that I realised was, like you said, I could do it. Because there's a structure that tells you, oh no, you've got to keep working.
That's it. It is. I wonder if that's deliberate. I don't want to get all tinfoil hatty, but if you were part of the owning class, you wouldn't want people to start thinking that they didn't have to do this every day, would you?
This is the mentality. Remember, BBC used to put religious programmes on a Sunday at 10:30 to send people to bed so they get up fresh in the morning.
I don't know if that's true, but I remember the programmes.
Exactly. I saw the mental thinking behind it anyway.
And it's worked out for you. How old were you when you took the decision?
About 63, 64.
So you could have carried on for another 5 or 6 years or more.
That was because I needed the friends, the satisfaction and everything else. So when I did retire, I then got in contact with my people I knew in the NHS and volunteered to work in the COVID vaccination centre.
Oh, gosh.
For a year.
Oh, good for you.
I felt just couldn't walk away.
But you were master of your own destiny.
Yes.
In a way that you weren't before. And did you crunch the numbers? Did you, like Andrew, the last fellow? You did the figures and thought, do you know what? We can do this. We can do this.
Yeah. As a previous worker with BT and a police officer, I then worked out that I was getting more money from my pensions than I was from being worked by the NHS.
And that is going to sound like Chinese to younger listeners, isn't it? It's going to sound like a completely foreign... You had what? You had a what? You could do what? They're not going to get that at all. Michael, thank you. That's lovely, actually. There'll be some presumably negative-ish stories, but it's not as if he's spent his time on a sun lounger like Dominic Raab during the fall of Kabul. He's gone out and done volunteering, keeping your life full. I mean, there are issues there. But, the more that you contemplate change and recognise alternative paths, the less likely you are to end up one of those fellas who reaches, or women, who reaches retirement reluctantly. I've told you this before, when I worked in a shop for quite a long time, actually. It was my student job, but the Fleet Street was proving inexplicably immune to my myriad charms for quite a long time after leaving university. So what was my student job became my job. And I always remember a fellow, I really liked him, actually. He was in the raincoats department of the menswear store where I worked, and he didn't want to retire, and they told him that he had to. And he was utterly heartbroken. He lived alone. He was bereft. And I've always remembered him. I could still remember his name. It wouldn't be appropriate to say it, but the idea had never... I mean, I was about 10. I was just fresh, still wet behind the ears. I never even thought about it. Retirement wasn't... But that idea of having to retire when you didn't really want to is really quite poignant and sad. And so that's probably why I'm so interested in this. It's addressing that 30-year-old sadness that I felt on his behalf. The more you hear from people who have embraced the end of their working life, the more it undoes some of the memory I have of that poor fella being tearful, actually, at being told. I remember the day he came out of the boss's office. He was absolutely broken. Oh, it's always funny when you work out stuff like that. That must be linked to my fascination with this subject. 11, I beg your pardon, is the time. And Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines. The Great Resignation. And, chatting then, was it Michael, I think? He said something about putting on religious programmes in order to send us all to bed on Sunday night. So he got up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for work on Sundays. It reminded me of another story that was around at the weekend. Almost 7 in 10 people regularly get the Sunday scaries. I think that's a slightly infantile description of a phenomenon that you're going to recognise when I describe it to you. You dread the week ahead. Come sort of Sunday afternoon, you start dreading the week ahead. 65% of us feel unease on a Sunday. It's even higher for younger people, 18 to 24. And this is work worries, lack of sleep, looming to-do lists. It's a poll of 4,000 people, which Therese Coffey, the Health Secretary, has taken up. It comes from the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities. Talking about it needs a better phrase, I think, than Sunday scaries. It makes it sound like a cartoon or something like that. But I remember that. Do you remember that? Well, actually, why am I saying do you remember it? 65% of us still have it. But it was banana sandwiches for me and songs of praise. I was a weekly boarder, or as a young lad, or a day boy, before I started boarding. I'd be at home on Sunday, and we always had banana sandwiches for tea on Sunday nights. And songs of praise would come on the telly, or Last of the Summer Wine as well. And the opening bars of Last of the Summer Wine were like a punch to the stomach, because it was, oh God, it's school tomorrow. I've not really had that. I've had that a few times in my career, but never for very long. It's been more about personnel than it has been about the job that I'm doing. But yeah, the Sunday, oh no, we're back to the grindstone. And interesting that popped up in a conversation about the Great Resignation. So you get that Sunday feeling and you think to yourself, like that graffito on the M40 that I mentioned to you a moment ago, why do I still do this every day? And for some reason that we're not pinning down, there is some reason that we are now seeing a generation of people think to themselves, I don't have to do this. I don't have to do this. And I don't know why. Why is it different from my dad's generation, from 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago? Why are the numbers of people going, do you know what, I'm knocking it on the head? Why are they rocketing to astonishing levels? 36 minutes after 11 is the time. Elaine is in Dartford. Elaine, what would you like to say?
I retired. Hello, James.
Hello,
I spoke to you last time, the day after the Lionesses won the
Fantastic.
World
I remember. It was amazing.
Yeah, anyway, I retired from midwifery when I was 55, and I took early retirement deliberately. One, because my sanity was at risk because it was making me so poorly. I couldn't cope with the stress and the responsibility, although I went into the job knowing full well that was
Yes, of course.
the reason. I didn't understand how poor the staffing levels were, how much we were relied on, how often you'd have to work a shift without going to the toilet, without having a break, without having a cup of tea even. You can't leave a lady when she's pushing her baby out. You've got no option. 9 times out of 10, you'd be going home late anyway. I put up with it. I loved the job. I really, really loved the job. I didn't like the politics around it, but I loved the job.
Sure.
Then my father-in-law died, and Mum didn't have anybody to look after her, so I was trying to balance both of them out together, and something had to give because I couldn't do it, and I couldn't leave Mum because my mum was deaf. She had to be signed to everywhere you went. So when we went out, we were signing to her. She had nobody to help her, so I had no option really in the long run of it.
I see.
So I took early retirement, and although I missed the job, I miss my friends desperately, but I don't miss the job now. But I couldn't live on just my pension because I took it early.
Right.
It was a reduced amount to what I had to do. So I had to go get a job basically to top up my pension.
Yes.
Which I do now. I work now. Instead of delivering other people's babies, I now pick people's apples to be delivered to their front doors. So I've gone from one extreme to another extreme. And although...
What, so you fill the boxes for the home delivery supermarket service?
Oh, yes, I do.
What's that like? Is that nice? Do you like that? Is it nice?
For me, it's okay because I just stick my earphones on and listen to an audiobook.
Yeah.
And I'm away. It's so far removed from what I used to do.
Well, it is.
It's comfortable. For me, it's really comfortable. Although I start at 4 o'clock in the morning, by 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm finished and I'm home.
That's not bad, is it?
No, it's not. My mum's now passed on, so I haven't got that anymore. It's fine. I mean,
but you'd never go back, and you're quite interesting because midwifery is precisely one of those areas where they're going to be trying to tempt people back into the workforce. What is there anything they could do? What could I dangle in front of you, Elaine, that would tempt you back into the NHS?
Nothing.
Nothing at all.
I'm sorry, nothing at all. I don't think they don't look after their people. It's too. Although I will bang the drum for the NHS till the day I die.
Yes.
The hierarchy of it is far too much. There's too many people fiddling in boxes and ticking boxes and making you do numbers and do this, that and the other to the people that are actually on the ground doing this, that and the other.
When did it start changing? When did it start? I know this isn't what you rang in about, but I'm very interested to know. When would you say it started? When did you feel it change, do you think?
When I started midwifery, when I was a lot younger, obviously, it was much... when I started, the hospital I went to had approximately 2,000 deliveries a year, which isn't a huge amount.
Sure.
When I left, it was knocking on to nearly 7,000 a year.
Gosh.
But the staffing hadn't addressed the amount of increase. It had gone up. Obviously, it had gone up.
But not by anywhere near enough. So the job becomes both harder and less satisfying and more stressful all at the same time.
I wasn't giving the women that I loved looking after the care that I wanted to look after. I couldn't sit and talk to women about...
Interesting.
I mean, you get banged on about, get breastfeeding up. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
You've got 5 ladies, all with breastfeeding trouble, and there's only one of you. What are you supposed to do?
No, I was there myself, actually, 16 years ago. I remember precisely those conversations. And you just don't have the hours. There aren't enough hours in your day to provide the help that you want to help.
And the other side of it, I looked after teenage girls and I loved that part of it. But there was also a huge social concept of it as well. We ended up going, I don't know if people know this, community midwives ended up going to social work meetings to put your pennyworth in as well.
Of course.
And then... then there was all the other sort of side of it, vulnerable women, and then you had to know where you're going to send somebody if she disclosed domestic violence.
It's our loss, isn't it? It's our loss, I think, people like you coming out. What about the day-to-day contact with people? You can't have a chat with an apple. Oh,
no, I have a chat with the other girls I work with. That's not an issue.
There's some nice camaraderie, is there?
the one major thing I did out of it is what the day I retired from midwifery, I went and looked about getting myself a little doggy because I'd always wanted a dog, and I refused to do it when I was doing shift work. It wasn't fair.
Oh, you're lovely.
And now I've got 2 rescue cocker spaniels that are sitting having their bellies tickled while I'm talking to you.
Fantastic.
And that is a plus to me. But I do miss the women. I desperately miss looking after ladies, and I desperately there is such an adrenaline rush when a baby's delivered and you're standing there knowing, I helped you do that. You don't deliver it, you help them do that.
Yes.
And then when they're in tears, and I mean, I've cried. I have cried.
Of course, yeah.
I think the saddest one is for a lady whose baby passed, and she sent me a card afterwards and said to me, thank you. And I thought, you'd been through so much and you'd lost your child, but I must have given good care for you to send me a card because you still remembered. And that's the card that in my house is now sort of prominent, not on display, but it's in my book, my memory book.
Oh, that's
but
lovely.
I do miss it.
I know. I'm going to have to crack on. You know that, don't you?
That's fine. Yeah, of course I do.
Because I can tell you're on a roll now. You'll keep me here till Sheila Fogarty's ready.
I just about the lionesses. I shan't phone in for a while.
No, I want you to know. Last time you rang in, you were telling me about the England 66, and you wanted to play football after the World Cup, and you went to school, and they said that's not for girls, didn't they? I remember.
That's it. Yeah. And
cheeky beggars.
I've got a whole wealth of life things that I could talk about, but I'm not going to.
Well, you can next. We'll do it again soon. All right, don't leave it so long next time. That was August. When was that? It was August.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't remember, but it was a while back.
Yeah, that was only a couple of months ago, so we can do it again before Christmas. Look after yourself, Elaine. Take care. 11:42 is the time. Chris is in Warrington. Mubble fubbles, apparently. 16th century phrase for a vague Sunday evening-ish blues and slight sense of doom. The mubble fubbles. There you go. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hello, mate. How you doing? You all right?
Yeah, very good, Chris. What's on your
good.
mind?
So I get really interested listening to what people are saying and the comments made by yourself.
Yeah.
Really relates to my position, James. So I'd worked for the same organisation for 30 years plus from when I left school. Got made redundant in 2012 when that company was privatised.
Right.
I didn't want to leave, and I was told it's voluntary redundancy, but there was nothing voluntary about it. I had to leave.
Yeah.
So I left. I got a good payout. Within a couple of weeks, I found another job. I was HR manager.
Okay.
Found another job at the local utilities company, the Water Board. Loved it. Within a few months, they put me on the fast-track promotion scheme. So I thought,
nice.
the future's bright. Yeah, really good.
The future's orange.
Yeah, that's it. 2 years later, I got called in the office. We're making redundancies. Last in, first out. Sorry, mate, you're going. We don't want to lose you, but you're going. So I had the money from my redundancy, my previous job, and I went to university when I was 50 years of age, and I studied for a medical degree. I got a first class qualification, came out, got a job within a few weeks at a local health centre. Fantastic, loved it, and I thought, you know what, I wish I'd have done this when I was in my 20s. Absolutely loved it.
So you were financially able to survive, though. That's important, isn't it? You had decent pensions, and you didn't have a massive mortgage to pay off or anything like that.
All that sort of stuff, and I'd paid my college fees as well, so I have no student loans or anything like that.
How old were you, if you don't mind me asking?
By the time I qualified, I was 55.
Gosh.
So, I was the oldest in the class by more than 20 years. The next oldest person was 32.
A complete change of direction then.
Absolutely. So I left college. I found a new job with a local clinic. I loved it. And I used to think to myself, I wish I'd have done this when I was 21, 22. We come to COVID, lockdown. I get paid furlough money. As soon as the furlough money stopped, the organisation contacted me and said, sorry, we're letting you go.
Oh, mate.
So I thought, you know what? I've just had enough.
Yeah.
I 3 times within sort of 10 years or so, less than 10 years, and I've just had enough. I did my sums. I looked at how much savings I had, and I thought, that's it. I'm done. I'm finished. And the sad thing is, I loved my job. I got a.
But you can't be getting slapped like that on an annual basis, can you? Without thinking, why am I doing this? Why am I still doing this?
And you know what, James? There is no money that you could offer me that would tempt me back to work. Nothing at all.
Why not?
I'm done.
Why not?
I got like the disappointment from sort of working in an organisation. The first one, you knew it was coming. They were letting people go. They were making people redundant.
Yeah.
They were saying, don't worry, it's not going to be you. And it was me.
Yeah.
And then the second one, I got on the fast track promotion. And I thought maybe things have worked out. And then
another rug pulled from under your feet.
And I thought, like I said, I did my sums. I paid my mortgage off.
Lovely.
The big thing is, what do I do with myself all day long?
Yeah, go on, briefly.
I walk my dog.
Yeah.
I walk to my dog. I talk to people. I love gardening.
Got LBC on, of course. That's very important. I love it. I like that. And there's something in your voice as well when you said that. No, there's no amount of money that could tempt me back. There's a lightness that I bet wasn't there when you were working, even particularly when you're worried about the axe falling again. And it means that you might have security of one sort, but you've got massive insecurity of another sort. Chris, mate, you've made me late for the break. It's the only reason I'm moving on. It's 10 to 12 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I'll draw your attention next to a report published by the Open Data Institute it's notable for two reasons. Firstly, because some of its findings are pretty scary, looking particularly at food poverty, but also because rarely for this sort of research, it acknowledges how difficult it actually is to get answers to the questions that they're seeking to answer. How many people may be slipping through the net of even being counted when it comes to a problem like food poverty. You can follow Open Data Institute on Twitter, have a proper look at the report, including a digital tool to help you explore through the data, showing rising cases and marked variations in social and geographical groups. If you are from if the head of your household, for example, is black or Bangladeshi, then you are twice as likely to be suffering from food poverty than if the head of your actually, it's different. It's 21% of families headed by an individual who is black, 12% Bangladeshi-headed families, and then 6% of families whose head of household is white. They all, of course, matter equally, but the disproportionate representation is pretty stark. Let me introduce you to Amanda Naylor, who's Chief Executive of the Manchester Youth Zone, an organisation that works with over 1,000 children and their families every week in North Manchester. In the absence of proper measures, Amanda, it is, as you've acknowledged in this report, going to be organisations like yours that are sort of charged almost reluctantly with capturing the data. So give us some data. What have you seen happening over the last few months or the last year with regards to the area in which you work?
James, we see, as you said, 1,000 children and families every week. And over the last 6 to 9 months, really, we've seen a 400% increase in requests for our food pantry. We've seen giving more and more food parcels and care packages to families that include things like essentials like washing powder and toothpaste that are seen as luxuries rather than the basics. But more starkly, I think what we see is the real impact of food poverty and children who come to us during the summer eating 5 breakfasts, not because they're hungry for 5 breakfasts, but because they don't know when their next meal's coming. So let's get as much food down me as I can, or asking to take food home for parents and siblings. And that's a very real data that we're seeing every day, children who are hungry. We're supposed to be a youth facility where children come and play and do sports and do media. We're not social services, but children can't do those things if they're hungry and they haven't been fed.
Have you always fed them? Have you always fed some of them?
No, so we started during COVID when we realised that children were out of school and they weren't going to get that meal that they would have done normally. And we were part of distributing food on behalf of the council to those families that we knew wouldn't get that school meal. We've had to continue that work because even though children are back at school, we're still seeing really high levels of food poverty, and families telling us all the time they're making choices around whether they can feed their children or whether they can heat their houses. And it's a narrative that we've heard again and again. But when you see it every day, you realise just how stark that challenge is, really.
And we haven't had a cold snap yet this year, have we? Or this winter?
No, absolutely. And I was just speaking to a mum the other day and she said, what do I do with my £5 electricity? Do I use it to cook a meal? Do I use it to do the washing? Or do I use it to run a bath for my child? And those are the kind of choices that families are making, because what do they do with the very little that they've got?
Well, I mean, there's also, it seems like an unnecessary complication, but I don't think it is it, to reflect upon the sort of food that children are eating as well when they're in food poverty. The actual nutritional value is one of the things that may be going out of the window in pursuit of convenience and cost.
Absolutely. At food banks, we're often seeing pasta and rice as staples, but without fruit, without vegetables, without fresh meat. Halal prices, for example, have really increased. So in terms of people being able to meet their own cultural and religious needs, it's costing additional for some of those families. And yeah, it's a real problem in terms of nutritional value. And we do lots of work with children and their families around how to cook on a budget. But the budgets that they're working to are so tiny that, we're struggling to give them the skills that they need to be able to manage.